standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages and praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God.
Open your Bibles this evening to James chapter 3. We'll start with reading a Bible passage this evening. James chapter 3, beginning our reading with verse 1. James 3 and verse 1. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that you shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn the whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member, and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, and sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, reptile, and creature of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It's an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. This evening I want us to talk about the power of tongue and the struggle that James is talking about in reference to controlling our tongue. I'm convinced that this may be the most difficult thing for all of us as a group. We all have our weaknesses and we all have our temptations. But there's one common factor, there's one common area that a group would struggle with. I have my suspicions that it is this particular idea here. There was a lady that said to her husband, I don't love you anymore. There was a teenager that said to his mother, I hate you. There was one student that said to another student, you are so dumb. You must be the dumbest person I've ever been around. Then there was someone else that said, I love you, I'm proud of you, you've done a good job. These statements that we have heard, and some of them, hopefully on the better side, we've actually said, show the power of the tongue to lift up and to build up, to wipe away tears, allow a person the strength and the courage to try again and to go on and not to give up. They also have the power to discourage, the power to drive people to despair, and even in some cases for people to go so far as to take their lives because of mean and hurtful and unthoughtful things that have been said. James deals with this particular problem over and over again in his 5 chapters, talking to us about the power that we have and the need for us to try our very best to control the tongue. And I think he also suggests that it's a never-ending battle, that we must continually guard what we're saying and how we say it. We must speak the truth, but even in speaking the truth, we recognize that there's some truths in reference to bad things that don't need to be said. We need to be careful of what we say, but also who we say it to. We need to be careful about saying what we say in the right circumstance. There are some things that can be said in private and will be accepted in a very good way. If those same things are said publicly in front of other people, great hurt and great damage can be done, and those things are not accepted at all. And then there's the tone of voice by which we would say a thing. I remember the story about a preacher preaching on hell, and someone criticized him for it, and he said, well, what I said was the truth. And they said, yes, what you said was the truth, but you sounded like you wanted us all to go there. The tone of voice, the way things that were phrased, the way that they were thrown out. I think that all of us can relate and understand what James was talking about when he talks about the power of the tongue. So what I want us to do is take a few minutes and look at some things that we don't hear very much in reference to what we say. The first being that simple statement, I was wrong, I have sinned. You don't find that even very much in the Scriptures. And went back and in my research, I found that only about 7 individuals actually said this, possibly 8. And most of these were in the Old Testament. And twice it was said by Pharaoh. And by his actions, it sounds like he really didn't mean it. Then there was Balaam, then there was Achan when he was caught up in his sin. King Saul, actually said it 3 times. And yet his actions also proved that there may very well have been a lack of sincerity in what he was saying. Then there was Shimei, and then there was David, then there was Judas, and then if you add to that the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. These are the only individuals that actually came to the point of stating that I have sinned. And when we look at the rest of what happened after these statements were made, one would maybe question the sincerity of actually what they had done. There is the human nature that steps in, and the tendency for us to want to blame somebody else. To blame somebody else for the wrong. In Genesis chapter 16 and verse 5, Abraham and Sarah, you remember, had been promised a child. And they had not had that child. And now that they're getting old. So Sarah devises a plan to give Hagar to Abraham as a second wife or a handmaid, and to have a child through her, which that was not an uncommon thing in that day. It didn't make it right, but it was not uncommon. Well, a child was born. After that child, Ishmael, was born, and through the process of time, Sarah came to realize that she had made a mistake. And it's interesting what she says in Genesis 16 and 5, in discussing this with her husband Abraham, she says, my wrong be upon you. My wrong be upon you. She had made a terrible mistake, and yet, as a human being, to accept the fact that she was wrong, that it was her fault, that it was her idea, was something that was very, very difficult for her to do. It takes a lot of humility for us to admit that we are wrong, for us to admit our mistakes and our problems, and even more so to confess that we have sinned. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, this has to do with Samuel's discussion with the king Saul. And you remember, as Samuel was digging out the truth out of Saul, he noted that the animals and people that were to be destroyed had not been destroyed. Saul, he lays the blame on the people. The people have done this. He was the king. He was in charge. And obviously he was responsible. If you go all the way back to Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden, we find as these folks were questioned by God, Eve blamed the serpent. Adam blamed Eve, and in reality actually blamed God, because he said, the woman that you gave to me. So it is difficult for us to admit our own wrong, admit our own sins, and thus we don't say that enough in our marriages. We don't admit our own faults within our family units to our children, to parents. We so many times are guilty of being filled with pride and laying the blame on somebody else. The second thing that we don't hear said enough is the admittance that we don't know. That we don't know everything. To listen to us, sometimes you would think that we do know everything. And all of us probably know somebody that always has an answer and always believes that they're right about everything. And maybe you and I, maybe we are that way sometimes. We need to recognize and understand that we don't know everything. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 19, he says, the way of the wicked is like darkness. Those do not know what makes them stumble, or they do not know what makes them stumble. We don't know everything that's in the dark. We don't know what we have tripped over. Now, this should not cause us to act as if we don't know some things. There are things that we know. One of the things that I have observed in our politically correct society, that there's a tendency for us as Christians sometimes to not actually say what we do know. From the Scriptures, for example, when we look at Ephesians chapter 1 and the last verses, when we look at chapters like Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where the Apostle Paul is talking about the body and he's talking about the church. What we do know from the Scriptures is that there is one scriptural church. And yet we sometimes struggle with saying that because of the denominational pressure of the world, our desire not to hurt feelings. Jesus himself said, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. We know that. We know that from the Scriptures. That tells us that if a person does not believe and is not baptized, that person shall not be saved. A person must be baptized. If a person is an accountable person in sin, a person must be baptized in order to go to heaven. We know that. And we need to state that with love and compassion and understanding, but to say what we do know. And on we could go along those lines in reference to what we do know. But the truth of the matter is there are many things that we don't know. There are things that we need to continually learn and continually study. So to say that we don't know, there's no shame in that. In fact, it proves a sense of wisdom, because none of us have the answers for everything. And yet the flip side of that, the danger is that we may be guilty of stating that nobody knows. Well, yes, we can know. Jesus said that you should know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8 and verse 32. John 17:17, sanctify them by thy truth. Thy word is truth. We can know the truth. We can know the gospel. We can know exactly what it takes in order for a person to be a Christian. We can know exactly what it takes in order for a person to be a faithful Christian. We can know by simply studying our Bibles what God requires in worship. And by knowing those things, when those who do not worship according to the Bible, we can know that that's not pleasing to God and it's sin. We can know that people are not saved unless they follow the plan that is set forth in the Bible, and so forth and so on. So we need to be willing to admit our ignorance in areas, but at the same time we need to recognize that we need to be quick and to state what the Bible does make very, very plain to us. Then the expression, I can do more. We many times hear ourselves and others making excuses for not participating, for not being involved. It really doesn't matter what activity it is, whether it's a luncheon or it's working at our strawberry booth, it's vacation Bible school, helping in our lectureship, helping in our giveaway day, whatever it may be, in our regular services, teaching one of our classes. We find ourselves many times excusing ourselves and not being willing to help. And there are times, obviously, when we can help. There are times when maybe we're not qualified of one way or the other to do. But at the same time, there are likely many times when we are not willing to volunteer because we're not willing to sacrifice. We're not willing to give up what we want to do. We're not willing to teach because we're not willing to do the study that needs to be done and must be done. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58, Paul says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. So we need to abound. We need to do more rather than less. We need to be willing to volunteer. We need to be willing to stand up and give our best effort and serve in every capacity that we possibly can. What is true in most congregations is that a smaller group is doing most of the work. We need to make sure that if that is the case here, that we're in that smaller group. That we are part of those that are doing, those that are saying, you know, what can I do? How can I serve? There are jobs that are there if we are willing to serve, so I can do more. Right along the line of that, we don't hear the statement, I can do better enough. This is something that should challenge each and every one of us. There are things that are better than other things. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 16, the wise man talks about that. There are things that are better. We can do better in controlling our tongues. All of us can do better in saying the things that need to be said, and letting people know that we appreciate them, letting people know that we love them, encouraging and uplifting and teaching and instructing. We can all do better there. And we can all do better by being very guarded about saying things that hurt and things that do damage. We likely all can do better when it comes to apologizing for things that we say sometimes, without thinking, for things that really pull down and things that really do damage. In Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 32, he says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty. And I think the emphasis there is on the fact that to be slow to anger is to possess self-control. And if we're slow to anger, we'll be very slow to say or to do something that ought not to be done. In 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 9 and 10, the first part of verse 9, the latter part of verse 10, he talks about brotherly love and that it is to increase more and more. So this can be done when we are seeking to do what ought to be done and to do better. And then the simple statement, I spoke without thinking. Thoughtless words are given daily. God help us to be more careful about what we say and how we say it. In Psalm 39, begin verse 1, the psalmist said, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle. The idea of putting a muzzle like you put on an animal to guard the mouth. The psalmist recognized, even as a biblical writer, that this was a challenge, that this was a difficult thing. Again, thoughtless words are very destructive. In James chapter 1 and verse 26, he tells us that our words can make our religion vain or useless. Everything that we are as a Christian can be made vain or void or useless if we don't watch what we say. and how we say things. Then, of course, James goes on to talk about the tongue as a fire and the destructiveness of fire and how that we need to control that and guard it. So to speak without thinking is not wise. And yet it is a challenge, I think, for all of us to have that kind of restraint and to be very, very careful about what we say. And now, from the flip side, we don't hear the statement, I'm proud of you, or I love you, or I appreciate you nearly enough. It's interesting that the wise man Solomon talks a lot about the things that we ought not to be guilty of in reference to the use of the tongue. But he also talks about the flip side as well. In Proverbs 3, verse 27, he says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due. So it's important that we tell people that we appreciate them. We tell folks that we're proud of them. One of the saddest things, I think, is that within many families, children never hear those words. They have the criticism. They receive the discipline and the punishment and the rebuke when they do wrong and when they mess up. But they don't hear those words of praise nearly enough. I am convinced that if children hear those words, I'm proud of you, I love you, I care about you, if they heard those words more, there would be fewer opportunities where they would have to be corrected or disciplined or criticized in some way. The same thing is true in reference to the Christian life. Many times in our service, I remember a story that, and Cecil's not here tonight, so I guess I can tell this. You know that Cecil and Mildred spent their working years in Michigan, retired, and moved back here. And after Cecil had been here for a little while, he received a thank you note for something that he had done. And he told me, he said, all my years in working where I worked, and Cecil was one of those that pretty much did everything, from open the doors to check the electric to take care of everything that was done. And he said, that's the first one I ever received. Isn't that sad? To hear a person talk about working in a church for some 25 to 30 years, and that's the first note of appreciation that they ever received. That kind of breaks my heart to think about the fact that is a reality. And maybe you've experienced it. Maybe you've not received the words of appreciation. And we're not talking about putting folks on a pedestal. We're not talking about praising people unduly. But what we're talking about is showing honor and respect, words of appreciation to those that deserve it and to those that need it. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse 25, the writer says, anxiety in the heart of a man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. So worry, depression, frustration, a good word, a kind word is many times all that it takes to bring us out of that situation. In Proverbs 15 and verse 4, he says again, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life. There's just a tree of life there. It puts life back in us. So we need to let people know that we're proud of them, that we appreciate them, that we care about them. When a person learns the proper use of the tongue, a person has learned a great truth, Proverbs 15 and verse 23. And the more that we practice saying words of appreciation rather than criticism, what we find in our lives is that we do criticize less. It's kind of difficult to do both. And if we will practice, if we will force ourselves to think about each day, each week, someone that we appreciate, somebody that we love, somebody that we care about, somebody that has done some good thing, and we will let them know, we will speak to them. We'll make a call. We'll write a note. We'll put something on our Facebook page. We'll do a tweet. We'll do a text just to let somebody know that we care about them and that we appreciate them. What we'll find is the criticism that maybe has creeped into our lives will slowly but surely disappear. The seriousness of everything that we're talking about tonight is found and summed up, I think, in the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 37. He says, "For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." So Jesus himself lets us know that our words testify of who we really are. Our words come forth from the heart. And it is our hearts that control our words and our outward actions. And so if we are a person of a mild and a loving and encouraging tongue, if we are a person who speaks the truth, if we are a person that uses the tongue to spread the gospel and tell people about Jesus, that tells us what is going on in our hearts. But if we are a person that slips into gossip, if we are the type that gets angry and says mean and hurtful things, if we are the kind of person that's always picking, this is wrong and that's wrong, and have a difficult time saying what's good, and seeing what's good, we need to search our hearts, because we're going to be judged by those things. And we can look at our hearts and thus and our words that come forth from our hearts and probably evaluate ourselves. And this is an area, again, that I think is a challenge for all of us to do better. It may not be that you are guilty of saying bad things, but do you say enough good things? It may be that one or more of us, maybe we are of that, we're the kind of people where the glass is half empty rather than the glass being half full. If that's the case with you, there's something that you can do about that. We can work. We can challenge ourselves. With God's help and God's grace and God's mercy, we can do a better job in not being critical and hurtful and condemning, and be a type of person that's looking for the good, looking for that which is beautiful. In thinking about this, I think about the little kid, and I told this story I think not too long ago, but they were going to get a puppy, and they went to the pound to get a puppy there, and they looked at all these puppies, and the little boy, he picked out one, and it was the ugliest little dog in the whole pound. And the parent says, "Why do you want that one?" And he says, "Because he has a happy ending, his little tail is flying." The little boy didn't pay any attention to how ugly the little dog was. But it was because of that happy ending. It was because that tail was just flying. And you know how little puppies will do. Well, you see, by our words, we become beautiful people if we use them properly. And it is by our words that we will lift up and we will encourage and we will strengthen. And it's also by our careless words that we do so much damage and so much hurt. Tonight I pray, as we've looked at this lesson, that it will encourage rather than discourage all of us. My intention is to challenge us and to challenge you as well as myself to resolve that this week we'll start making some changes. And even if you are an encouraging person, that you'll do more. If you are somewhat more of a critical person, that you work on that. And that all of us will look for areas that we can praise and encourage and uplift and invite and teach rather than doing the opposite. If you're not a Christian, we encourage you to become a child of God, to get involved in the body of Christ, where truly you can be an encourager for the cause of Jesus Christ. Those of us as Christians, there may be things that we need to correct and correct in a public way. There may be things that we need to talk to God tonight privately before we go to sleep. whichever that situation be. Let's make our peace with God. Let's make our peace with one another. And let us especially guard the use of our tongues. The invitation is yours as we stand.